Welcome back. With me for tonight's Big Picture Politics panel, Huey Newsom, Nate Sweet, and George Landreth. And let's get back to it. Now, right now, Congress is considering the approval of a $45 billion merger between Comcast and Time Warner Cable. If approved, that merger would give Comcast control of 19 of the 20 largest markets in the country, 30% share in cable and a 40% share in broadband. According to Internet policy expert Susan Crawford, it would also create a network that would pass nearly 2/3 of American households and would have just one direct competitor, Verizon's Fios service, which would overlap with only 15% of the new company's territory. During an appearance on CNN's Reliable Sources on Sunday, Minnesota Senator Al Franken called the proposed merger a disaster.
This is the #1 cable TV company buying the #2. And this is the #1 internet broadband company buying the #3. And by the way, they also have this vertical integration where they have 12% of all television that's produced. This is just this is a disaster. This is more than about...
So, I mean, you know, with the death of net neutrality, Comcast can pretty much do whatever they want. They've already they've already forced Netflix to pay them. And by the way, I find it particularly ironic that Comcast is running ads on MSNBC. I don't know if they're showing up elsewhere. It's the only place I've seen them, which they own, saying that by buying Time Warner, they're going to spread net neutrality to more people. I realize they're under, I believe it's either a court order or a business agreement to maintain net neutrality in some markets for some limited period of time, but it's not, I mean, they've historically fought that tooth and nail.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's so amazing about the Comcast Time Warner case is this, I think, is one of the clearest examples of the regulatory capture that exists within the United States government right now. I mean, Comcast is one of the biggest donors to all members of Congress, both parties. You know, this isn't a Democrat or Republican. Think this is a Washington establishment aligned with corporate interest type thing.
86 of their 107 lobbyists here in D.C. are former employees of the government or staff members of Congress. They spent a little over $3 million in 2012, and so far this year, in 2014, they spent $1.3 million just on lobbying. That's a mind-boggling amount of money to spend just whining and dining people.
Yeah, and people wonder why the hearings were apparently so boring. It's because everyone in Congress has a vested interest in continuing Comcast's monopoly power. It means more campaign donations down the line. It means more support.
This seems to me, I mean,
on.
you know, other than the fact, the really kind of horrible fact that this will not be covered on NBC or their affiliates like MSNBC, which is owned by Comcast, which I think speaks something about this. I think the larger issue is that this is one of dozens of monopolies. I mean, virtually every industry in America has become monopolized.
And that's something. To me, this is where the progressive wing of the Democratic Party and the libertarian wing of the Republican Party can really start to put some voice behind this, because I see the Rand Pauls and the ultra left wing part of the progressive caucus talking about why this is so dangerous to the consumer. Yeah. I really see an opportunity here, but you're right. There's such a vested interest, and this is one of the reasons why conservatives have to be sticking to their guns, so to speak, because as you grow bureaucracies, as you grow regulatory power, it can be manipulated.
But you're absolutely right, and that's what we're seeing in this case. But on the other hand, George, if government doesn't constrain the power of giant corporations or billionaires, what does?
Well, I think the marketplace might do a better job than we give it credit for. And let me give you an alternative view on this question, because they will control a lot of, they'll have a position in a lot of different markets. But what they won't do is, by merging these two, they won't lose out on competition, because the two companies have a footprint in different parts of the country. And so it won't be like the people in Houston will end up now with, where they used to have 3 or 4 choices, now they've only got 2. They'll still have choices. It's just that now the choices that they'll have will be from a company that can provide them more resources, because as I understand, Time Warner's internet capacity has diminished over time, hasn't kept up, and the point of this is that it will give them the resources to up things. And so to me, if I'm sitting in TV watching in Kansas City or in DC, I don't really care if they have stations in you know, Seattle or LA, but I care where I am. And as I understand, this won't actually change anything in terms of competitive forces. Everyone will still have at least, I think 98% of the country will still have at least
If you are,
I think 3 choices
if you are
minimum
a provider,
for television.
Well, first of all, I think 3 choices sucks.
Well, that's
I mean,
pay,
in,
though.
in most European countries, you have at least 70 or 80 choices.
Right.
And that's why, in France, you get 130 channels of TV, plus you get 100 MIPS high-speed broadband, plus you get telephone service for $35 a month.
Right.
I mean, because you have actual competition. But beyond that, if you're a provider, if you're running a website, if you have a website, whether it's Americans for Prosperity or the Tom Hartmann program, if you've got a website, they can now come to you and say, we got 40% of America. If you want 40% of America to see you without having to wait 3 seconds with a little spinning wheel, cough up some money. And Netflix has already crossed their palm with millions of dollars.
Yeah, and I think what you're seeing, Comcast is becoming the ultimate gatekeeper to the information commons. I mean, now not only with the death of neutrality can they essentially control editorial content that comes through the networks that they own, they also now can control, which content economically. And I think that's something Americans really need to sit back.
So really, there's
and
two
consider.
issues. There's really 2 issues here in the minute we have left. One is monopoly and corporate monopoly, the larger issue. And the second is, why doesn't the FCC, and again, I think this is regulatory capture. I think this is people hoping that they'll get a job, well-paid job when they leave. Why doesn't the FCC declare a broadband a common carrier so that, reestablish net neutrality? It's within their power. When the U.S. Circuit, when the D.C. Circuit Court ruled on this thing, this is what they said. It's up to the FCC.
Well, whenever you start talking about antitrust laws and monopolies, what I worry about is who's making the determination of who's too big. In this situation, I think that we talked about some of the fact that we do have local competition, and that is true. So I don't know if this is necessarily it hits the rules of monopoly, unfair choice, unfair lack of choice, etc.
I think you're right. This is a discussion that we need to have in America, and we haven't had, frankly, this discussion since the 1980s.
Right.
So anyhow, Huey Newsom, Nate Sweet, George Landreth, thank you very much.